Roxana, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And so I guess first, can you tell us a little bit about the freedom of press situation in Iran and the role that the Press Supervisory Board plays in regulating the media there?
The situation in the press right now in Iran is pretty dire. There have been increasing restrictions on the media, particularly after the disputed presidential election of last year. Many more publications were shut down. Several journalists were arrested, and for a time after the election, Iran was the largest jail for journalists in the world, according to Reporters Without Borders, and now it is still in the top 5. And the role of the Press Supervisory Board, from what I know from before I was arrested last year, there are several officials, government officials on that board, and they play a role in creating limits for journalists, namely in deciding which publications can get permits to print and which ones should be shut down.
Now, this past weekend, there was an announcement made that the pro-reform newspaper Shark is allowed to publish again after being closed for 3 years. Do you think something like this is a good sign?
I don't know enough about that yet, and I don't know if this is some kind of a step to try to show some compromise or to lessen criticism of the authorities for press restrictions. So we have to see, and I think it's supposed to focus on social, cultural issues, not political issues. We have to see how much, what kind of reporting it does have. But when it was open and functioning before a few years ago, it was very popular and it had some very good analysis and reports in it.
Now, Iranian Canadian filmmaker and Newsweek reporter Maziar Bahari was also detained in Evin prison, and in his accounts of interrogations, he says interrogators were convinced that Newsweek was an intelligence agency connected to the U.S. government and called him a media spy, and your interrogators made some similar allegations that your journalism was cover for spy work you were doing for the government. Do you think that the regime really believes that foreign journalists are spies for their countries?
Well, my interrogators more so pretended at least, I don't know if they really believed, but I don't think they did, that the book that I was writing about the Iranian society was a cover for espionage for the U.S., which it wasn't. So you're wondering, do they really think that journalists are spies? Is that the question? Perhaps some of them do. It's hard to say what all of them think, and perhaps some of them really do. And one of the foreign journalists in Iran once told me the Iranian authorities think that foreign journalists are spies in Iran because the Iranian authorities themselves use Iranian journalists as spies, so they think everybody else does. So that was an interesting viewpoint, but I don't know. It also depends on your definition of espionage. I mean, if the authorities think that sharing information that they don't want to be reflected to the public, or sharing analysis, that was a word that my captors said, that analysis, they seem to be very sensitive about analysis, which they claim the CIA cannot get. If they consider that espionage, then any journalist can be considered a spy. But I think that they knowingly falsely accuse many people of crimes such as espionage or trying to incite a soft revolution to overthrow the regime and so on, as a way to silence their critics and keep a tighter control on society.
Now, in your book, you mentioned that you were allowed to, at some point, to bring some books back to prison with you, including a Bible. And I think some people reading the book might be surprised that you're allowed to bring a Bible with you, given that it's an Islamic republic, and also kind of the strange situation that some of the other prisoners with you were in there because of their religious affiliations. So I guess, can you talk about, freedom of religion issues in Iran?
Well, the Islamic regime, actually the Iranian constitution recognizes 3 minority religions officially, and those are, they say, religions of the book. And they're the ancient Persian religion of Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and also Judaism. And they're allowed to have members of parliament. They're allotted a certain number of seats in parliament, and they can usually worship privately, but they face many other limitations. And some members of minority religious groups, feel that they are treated as second-class citizens, and face certain limitations that Shiite Muslims do not. There are also Sunni Muslims in Iran, many of them, and they have also complained about discrimination. They say, for example, there's no Sunni mosque in Tehran or in Mashhad, which is a very large city, and only a Shiite Muslim can become president in Iran. So, I mean, there are some, I guess, they have some rights, but they also have certain limitations because of their religion. And I did have two cellmates who are Baha'is, and they're still in prison. And the Baha'i faith is thought to have the largest number of, it's thought to be the largest non-Muslim minority religion in Iran. And they are not recognized by the regime at all. And in fact, many hardliners consider them as heretics. And I believe they're being persecuted because of their religious beliefs.
Now, President Barack Obama is having a nuclear security summit this week, and the situation in Iran is one of the top priorities in these discussions. And this past weekend, U.S. Defense Secretary Robert Gates said that he doesn't believe that Iran has the capability to build nuclear weapons, and that he's hoping that imposing tighter sanctions will deter them from continuing on with their nuclear program. What do you think about the idea of more sanctions? And will it deter them from developing their program?
Well, I think it's difficult to predict what will happen in Iran. I mean, normally the country's very unpredictable, and I think in recent months it's become even more predictable. I think with sanctions, anytime you think about imposing them, you have to think about how they might hurt the ordinary people. And of course, there's no magic bullet either that will resolve all the problems. And I think the most important thing, though, is when you're considering these different steps to take, that yes, the international community must think about the nuclear issue, but they must not forget about human rights issues, which I believe should be a first-tier issue and not just a second or third-tier issue. Just like one of my cellmates told me when I was in prison in Iran, she said, when you return to America, please tell others that our country is not only about the nuclear issue, but it's also about people like us.
Now, the Committee to Protect Journalists reports that there are more journalists imprisoned in Iran than any other country in the world. What actions can people here in the U.S. and internationally take to help secure the release of journalists, both in Iran and just journalists imprisoned worldwide?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's the most recent statistic, but it might be. I think people can take a lot of steps to try to help journalists who are imprisoned in Iran and elsewhere. Specifically about Iran, there is a CPJ, Committee to Protect Journalists, and other journalism organizations have organized a petition, and they're trying to collect 10,000 signatures of people who are calling for the release of journalists who are imprisoned there, and that's at oursocietywill-be-a-free-society.org. Also, many journalists have had to flee the country, and they're trying to start new lives overseas, and it's very difficult. Many of them just left with a little bag or something, and they want to work, they want to learn the language of their host country, they need visas, and they need places to stay, and Reporters Without Borders, which is in France, is spearheading efforts to try to help them, and people can log on to rsf.org to find out more about helping them. And I think media coverage is very important. The public in different countries in America, they need to know about the plight of people such as journalists who are still jailed in Iran. And when the public is more informed and something's important for the public, then it usually makes it more important for the government authorities as well.
Are you still planning to write the book that you were working on before you were imprisoned?
I'm not sure. I hope I can return to it. I still have my copies, so I hope I can.
Can you tell us about some other projects that you're working on, or just future projects that you're considering?
I'm not sure in the long run what I'm going to do, but I'm on this book tour for another month and a half or so, different cities in America. Also, I helped with a movie called No One Knows About Persian Cats, which is about underground music in Iran, and that movie is opening on Wednesday in New York. It has its opening in America in New York, and I hope that whatever I do in the future, it will have something to do with human rights.
Roxana, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching.